like how should they view a recruiter? Are you a candidate's friend? Are you on their side? Are you not on their side? And then like, are you blindly selling a company? Let's dry run this journey, right?
Sure.
Where you have a new position from a company, right? You tapped into your existing network.
Yeah.
Nobody fits the bill or they didn't convert, right? So the role is still open and now you have to source new candidates. How will you actually search? As a candidate, I would be curious, right? What should I do on my LinkedIn profile? How, as a candidate, should I select the best offer? As a recruiter, what would be your advice on selecting the best? Let's move on to a more touchy subject, which has been very relevant recently: layoffs. Right? And we are live. Thank you, Prajwal, for joining us in the next edition of Pakka Nimbu Podcast. Prajwal is the AVP with Matrix Partners India in the human capital function. Prajwal, do you want to introduce yourself very quickly?
Sure. Bhavin, firstly, thanks a lot for inviting me over here, for hosting me. A quick introduction on my profile. Part of Matrix Partners India, as you mentioned. I work over here in the human capital team as an AVP. I come with roughly 10 years of experience overall, a decade of experience in talent acquisition. Have been with early stage startups, have been with enterprise companies, and even VC, let's say companies like Swiggy, Pharmacy, where I've led teams and I've built technology, product, and design units. And currently at Matrix, I help our portfolios in hiring critical leadership roles. And we also do provide critical HR support too for our portfolios. Could be in terms of helping them building org, could be in terms of helping them providing with tools to manage and lead and build critical functions with the unit.
To dive into the conversation, let's start with the role that talent acquisition plays for a business. Do you want to talk about how critical is talent acquisition as a function for any business, small or large?
So TA is always one of the most critical aspects, because recruiters would generally have an excellent exposure in terms of evaluating the market, in terms of connect with the leaders in the market. They could help a company to hire a potential leader, right? Could also help the company to brand themselves, right? Recruiters are also brand ambassador for a company. I've seen that founders who have had a very critical approach and who are very clear on how a team has to be built, right? And especially in terms of their aspiration in terms of scaling and building teams. If the founders have some of the right definitions over here, I've seen them building world-class products, right?
Right. You mentioned one very interesting thing, that if founders have the right definitions. What do you mean by that? Can you elaborate on that more?
Number one, in terms of forecasting on what's necessary, right, for a founder in terms of scaling. So it's basically the clarity of thoughts which the founders do carry in terms of not just business, but even in terms of finding those void in the team. The founders should look forward in terms of identifying the gaps in the function, and then try finding the best hires in the market, and try plugging them into the void. And then that's how you look forward in terms of building world class products.
Let's address some candidate side fears, right? That I have heard from so many people in my network. How should they view a recruiter, right? You said all the right things, but they can be seen from a different lens. So let me spell out what I mean here. Recruiters are brand champions for the organization that they are hiring for, and they are working with a company, and they are hiring for that company. So many candidates feel that, oh, a recruiter is just going to sell me the company blindly, and recruiter is on the company's side. And then like, how should they view a recruiter? Are you a candidate's friend? Are you on their side? Are you not on their side? And then like, are you blindly selling a company? How does all of this work? So how should a potential candidate look at you?
Right. So a recruiter is well known in the market as a candidate's advocate, right? When I say that, our overall objective is to help hire the best talent in the company, right? And probably at certain point in time, a recruiter might not find a candidate to be fitting in, for a requirement or for the stage at which the company has been built. But this is the network that a candidate should carry with a recruiter, so that eventually, when the time comes, when it's the right time for the company to hire for certain resources, a recruiter
Right.
should actually think about the candidates they have interacted with, right? And that's how we maintain a long list of notes and the repository that we have on the set of candidates that we have interacted with, right? If it's for a senior software engineer or lead engineering role, a recruiter at any point in time would be interacting or dealing with roughly 50 to 150 odd profiles, right? It's always very critical in terms of building that relationship with a candidate, right? From the recruiter end, in terms of number one, understanding their aspirations, and also identifying, the potential roles that we as a team would find the candidates to be fitting in, right? On that end, especially for candidates, it's very critical for them to explain or to talk about their aspirations to the recruiter, right? Or let's say if a candidate A has been working with certain company and he or she wants to move into startups, they should be very critical and very thoughtful in terms of knowing about the company, about the business they are into, and also talk about their aspiration and how would their experience and aspiration would help the company in terms of scaling, right? In terms of being very honest, in terms of being transactional, talking about the experience they have carried, right? In terms of helping build their career, right? And how
Right.
recruiters end of the day, help them in terms of finding their way, is something that a candidate should be looking after.
So you mentioned some very, very interesting points, which is
Right,
that the candidate should be um, transparent and as honest and clear
right,
about their aspirations, right?
right,
uh, it's worth expanding onto this. Like, I probably know where you're heading with this, but let's spell it out more clearly. Are these
sure,
aspirations just technical, professional aspirations that I want? Maybe I want to lead a team, I want to like architect a project, like things like this, or more than that? Hey, I have financial constraints. I'm looking for a certain amount of salary. I have
yeah,
time constraints. I've just begun my family. I need more time. I need work-life balance, right? I don't want late night calls. So probably companies with West Coast, US West Coast, they are like not for me because they'll have like evening calls. How important are these articulations? Many a times
right,
candidates actually fear that, like, how do I say all of this to a recruiter? It's almost a crime if I mention all of this because am I not willing to work hard? Like, will it not give a wrong impression? So how does this play out? Like, how do recruiters see this aspect if candidates mention or if they don't mention? What is good, what
right.
is bad?
So number one, a candidate should be very clear on what are their priorities. Number one, if their priority is compensation, or if their priority is working across time zones, or if they are preferring in terms of working with early stage startups, right? Or let's say if
Right.
they aspire to be an entrepreneur in future, and if they want to work with some talented founders in the market, right? So these are some of the priorities which the candidate should, make a note of, and talk very candidly with the recruiter, because end of the day, I would highly recommend the relationship not to be more of transactional, but more of networking, more of cherishing a long-term relationship, right, with a recruiter. Each of us grow in our career, right? Let's say if a candidate gets in touch with a recruiter, let's say 5 years down the line, 5 years behind, right? And let's say another 5 years down the line, a recruiter would have reached to another set of organization, which could be a candidate's dream company to work with, right, in future.
Right.
End of the day, we always remember the best conversations that we have had, right? And the ones who have always stayed close in touch with us, and where we have had interesting conversations, right? And given it's the world of social media, we all keep a very close track on each and every profile, right? And it's going to be more of a relationship which a candidate could build in terms of approaching and having a gate pass towards interviews, right, from the recruiters, right? So why I'm saying this is because, to answer your question, it's very critical for candidates to understand their priorities, right? End of the day, if let's say if compensation is a priority for someone, and if they are planning to move into early stage where it's going to be more equity driven, right, rather than fixed
Yeah.
or certain compensation driven, that's going to be
Yeah.
a misfit, right, for a candidate. So it's very critical for them to understand, which are the angles they should look at evaluating an opportunity, and who are the set of recruiters they should interact with, and how could they build critical relationship with company as well as recruiters.
Interesting. Do you really remember like conversations that you had maybe a year or 2 years ago with a few candidates? I'm sure that's a small set, but like, is that
Right.
true?
Certainly.
Do you recall candidates?
Of course. It's not just me, but the whole fraternity. Now that I keep interacting with a lot of recruiters in the market. See, so at times, even though we interact with hundreds of candidates, right, at times, but it's just those 2-3 conversations, right, where we are always inspired by the aspiration and by the sheer talent which the candidate would carry, right. And end of the day, we have also tracked how the candidate have scaled and grown in the market. I'm going to be very honest. In fact, in one of my earlier firm that I was working with, I've helped hire one of a candidate who's been in touch with me for over 10 years, right? So this was when he was just a senior software engineer, and I found a leadership role which was suiting to what the candidate was working, and we always kept in touch and understanding the aspirations. We've been able to find a role, right? And I was able to help influence our chief technical officer regarding the aspiration the candidate did follow, and how have he scaled throughout the past decade, right? And which did certainly help us in terms of finding a potential role for him. And end of the day, we've seen tremendous work which has been contributed by this person. So yes, we do. And we have memory like an elephant. And I still remember the ones that I'm interacted 8 to 9 years back. We love high potential candidates who are very eager, who have this hunger and of the hustle. And we know that end of the day, they are the ones who will solve for something in the market. That's
So then at this point, it's much less about the resume, right? Consider this person who you were in touch with for a decade.
Yeah.
It's not like you looked at his current resume and then maybe he reached out to you. I'm not sure if that guy was looking for a job, guy or girl, but maybe they even weren't looking for a job, and you actually found a good fit, and you knew their curve, you knew their trajectory as to how they've grown and what are their strong and weak points. And that's where I think you pitched. It's more like you pitching the candidate to a company rather than presenting a candidate and then let the company decide on their own. And here is where like you becoming the candidate's champion comes into picture. I think so it's much less about the resume and more about just genuinely showing yourself and your aspirations to a recruiter, and maintain that relationship, like build that relationship, and the right opportunity will present itself.
True. I mean, this is true, but we should always look at two sides of the coin. Over here it was a relationship which I have always cherished, right? And we've always kept in touch. But let's say today, if I have another critical role, right, and if I have to look at cherishing another relationship for another decade, right, for that, resume certainly plays a critical role, right? Not every time we work on a role, we'll have a tailor-made candidate, right? End of the day, let me any recruiter, he or she will have to do sourcing, right? And in terms of building newer relationships, in terms of building newer pipeline, to probably end of the day hire the potential candidate. To answer your question, yes, relationship do cherish, and yes, resumes also do matter.
So awesome point. Let's deep dive into this. Let's dry run this journey, right?
Sure.
Where you have a new position from a company, right? You tapped into your existing network.
Yeah.
Nobody fits the bill or they didn't convert, right? So the role is still open, and now you have to source new candidates. How will you actually search? Will you search in your, I think existing database is already taken care of. So is it then LinkedIn where you search? Like what is the funnel? What is the top of the funnel?
So firstly, as you rightly mentioned, our database is something that we will evaluate first. Let's say if I get a requirement today, I would firstly try to understand if I've interacted with someone in the past, right? And if there's a name which strikes in my mind. And if it's yes, then I would certainly love to interact and identify if the certain candidate is exploring at the moment and try pitching about the company. If not, LinkedIn is one of the most critical tool which a recruiter would use, right? In terms of, let's say, networking, in terms of reaching out to high potential candidates. There are also various
Okay.
other, including a few job boards. There are also newer tools which are coming in the market which could help us in terms of sourcing profiles. But LinkedIn, I would say, is the recruiter's best friend, and most of our sourcing, most of our networking happens through LinkedIn.
I'm just curious, what are these newer tools?
It could be, let's say, Top Hire, or we have AngelList,
Okay.
we have IIM
Yeah.
Jobs,
Insta
a lot of
hire. Yeah.
Hire, right?
Hirist.
Exactly, Iris. So there
Right.
are various other
Okay.
tools. It could be categorized into job boards and active way of sourcing candidates. But LinkedIn is always our primary tool in terms of reaching out to network.
So then, as a candidate, I would be curious, right? What should I do on my LinkedIn profile, right? As a recruiter, what advice would you give me
Right.
um, about my LinkedIn profile?
Look, so I would highly suggest for anyone who's watching the podcast to create a LinkedIn. Firstly, create a LinkedIn profile, because this is the generation of social media. And to be very honest, Bhavin, I've seen a few candidates, even at leadership role, who don't have a profile. Probably someone who would like to keep their profile very discreet. I completely understand. But if someone is aspiring to grow in the market, to be well known
Hmm.
in the industry, it's very critical for them to be on social media, right? And the best
Okay.
professional social media platform that we have is LinkedIn. Um, Few aspects that we look at in a LinkedIn profile, and I would highly recommend anyone watching this to probably encourage themselves in terms of doing, is to firstly create a good summary of their profile, right? And then ensuring that you've mentioned your career progression in the most sophisticated manner, in terms of trying to identify what are the problems that you have solved working, let's say, as a developer, or once you have scaled to be a senior software engineer and then to be a lead. What are some of
Hmm.
the roles? What are some of the projects that you have worked, right? And in case you have worked on some of the most critical tools or critical technologies, please ensure mentioning these, because end of the day, while we drive our search, we certainly go with keyword search, right? While we mention in the search column, or the criteria, while filtering through the profile, we do mention
Okay.
these critical technologies while we are working on some of the niche roles, right? Because it helps us in terms of funneling down the set of profiles who might be the best fit for our search, right? So ensuring that you put in the critical products, or the tools that you've worked with, and also ensuring that you have updated your the current profile in terms of the current designation that you are in, as I said, in terms of helping us understand your career trajectory, and also do mentioning about some of the skills that you carry, and the academics that you have. In case you could get some good recommendations from some of your ex bosses who are very well known in the industry, that's something which would be awesome, because we also do review through some of the recommendations, especially when it has come through from a highly known leader, a prominent leader in the market, right? So, if possible, do try getting a quick recommendation, but at least ensuring that your work profile is up to date. It's clearly mentioned with the technologies, is something that I would highly recommend for anyone over here to do.
Okay. Sounds good. So you're mentioning that the projects and the current designation should be mentioned, the technologies that they've worked on, but and this drives the keyword search, right? But what about the aspirations? You mentioned that they should mention aspirations as well. How does that play into your search? Um, can you give an example?
As I said, aspirations could be mentioned in the summary. It could be a liner. Let's say, I
Okay.
aspire to work with, let's say, if someone is mentioning that I aspire to work with some of the well-known founders in the ecosystem, right? Or I
Hmm.
aspire to work with an early stage startup which has been built by some rock solid founder, right? Who have experience in terms of building and scaling products at 100x. So that's
Right.
something where we consider the candidate is more passionate in terms of, number one, either looking forward to be an entrepreneur in future, or let's say would love to learn the trick and trades of the industry working with these leaders, right? I'll give you an example, especially for leadership profiles. While someone is looking forward in terms of exploring and trying to connect with recruiters and hiring manager, I would highly recommend them to create a cover letter, right? I'm sure you might have seen candidates preparing a cover letter, and a cover letter is very critical because that actually talks again, more like LinkedIn summary, that talks more about what have they achieved, the credentials they have, and
Yeah,
why is he or she looking forward in terms of evaluating a role with certain company they're looking forward to apply for, or to be interviewed for, right? This is very critical, especially I would say for mid to leadership roles, not to blindly apply in all the companies, but rather be very candid, and be very thoughtful on what kind of companies would excite them, and how should they look forward in terms of approaching a recruiter or hiring manager over here. Let's say if someone mentions saying, I want to delve into startups, just giving an example, it could be various
right,
functions, but let's say if someone mentions that I want to delve in early stage startups, let's say in the fintech domain, and work with some of the known founders, and help them in terms of scaling and building the next big fintech industry or company over here in India, is something
right.
that gives us more confidence, saying the candidate has the right hunger, and could be more of a hustler in terms of driving himself or herself to reach to a level where potentially the candidate could be the next CXO in the industry, or could also be an entrepreneur, right? So this is
Right.
just a quick example of how some of their statements could impact our mind while we are swamped with hundreds of resumes. So it's always being noted among the 10 or 15 odd profiles, right? Talking about the sheer aspiration that you have, right? And how your experience could help a company in terms of scaling and building products is something that I would highly recommend someone to mention, right?
Got it. Okay, so some of the good things that you have seen are basically a good cover letter, a good summary of what do they aspire to do in what domain, in what type of companies,
Right.
and what their trajectory has been, what have they
So,
been working on. Like
right.
these are
And
good
also,
things to have. Mhm.
right. Just adding a quick pointer in terms of identifying the impact the candidate have played in their overall journey, right?
Yes.
Could be in their earlier role, right? Let's say if it's a developer, talking about the impact they've had in terms of building a feature or scaling a feature, could be in terms
Hmm.
of reducing the latency, could be in terms of building scale of the product, right? Let's say if a candidate mentioned saying, while I was joining the product and the product was having a number of transaction, uh, while the time I moved out of the product, I've helped them to scale with n plus certain numbers, or n power of 2 or 3 right percentage of scale that I've helped the product to increase, right? Talking in terms
Sure.
of data, right? Being more of a data oriented approach in terms of helping us to understand what have their impact be. Probably in terms of percentages, it could be like 3% to 50% in terms of increasing the rate of
Yeah.
transactions, or
Some
right,
quantification,
like
basically. Some
quantification.
quantification of what they have achieved.
Exactly, being more of data oriented rather than writing sentences, right, is something
Right.
that would talk more about how critical their impact has been and how well they know the product, right? End of the day, let's say even being an engineer, he or she should be able to talk about the complexities which goes around while executing the product, and also the features, and also how does the product work, and what are the problems they the product would solve in the market, right? Is something that is very critical for someone to understand while they talk about impact, right?
Personally, as a hiring manager,
Right.
the quantified impact is something that
Yeah.
pops out to me more than anything else, because it
Correct.
shows that not just that candidate has had the impact, but
Yeah.
also they understand the impact that they've had. Right? It's
Exactly.
very easy for people to have an impact because somebody was leading them to do some work, but they don't
Right.
really understand it. Right? Versus them appreciating that this is what I have achieved. And that's a very, very significant differentiating factor,
Correct.
because tomorrow you can reject something that is less impactful,
Right.
right? That executive decision making appears in your thinking as a candidate, and that is very, very critical to grow up the ladder.
Yeah.
So that is something that I value the most personally.
Yes.
And yeah, like ton of resumes that I've seen where people just write subjective statements. I increase the scale, or even worse, like they don't talk about the impact at all. They just talk
Exactly.
about what they've done, right? I've written Java code. I have developed this module, right? I have set up
Right.
database from scratch. Sure, but like to what end? Like what have you achieved? Awesome. Let's take the flip side of this question. We talked about
Sure.
some good things that people can have on their LinkedIn profile, on their resumes. What are some of the bad things that people have had? And if you see these,
Right.
you just run away, you just put that profile aside. Can you give some counter examples?
Right. So, from the look of the resume, some of the negative factors that comes in is number one, as you earlier mentioned, while someone just copy pastes, the same work profile which they had mentioned earlier, right? It could be in terms of I have bug fixed certain product, I have worked on sanity testing, regression testing, right? I've seen 7 to 8 liners of similar thing which was mentioned in their earlier page of resume being mentioned over here again, right, in the new role.
Oh,
uh,
so
you
they're
know
just repeating themselves.
repeat that because that's how they build a resume. Probably some of them might not know how to build an impactful, a very brief and impactful
Hmm.
resume, right? So while we see 6 pages, 7 pages resume of them talking in depth of what they have done, that's again one more red flag that we see, right? Because no one has
Hmm.
time to evaluate 6 7 pager resume, right? Wherein as I said earlier, considering the amount of profiles that flows in our way, we might be able to give 15 to 20 seconds. In some cases, a recruiter would also reduce the number of seconds they provide for each and every resume in terms of reviewing, right? Let's say if we have to shortlist your profile, with the first glance, right, of understanding what you've done, the companies that you've worked with, the impact that you've had, and also the academics, right, the pedigree that you carry. It's very critical to make your resume brief as well as cutthroat, right, rather than explaining everything in depth. Another thing is, we've always seen some set of candidates who just bombard the whole office with emails, right, regarding their profile. Each and every one of employee over here would have received a referral from them. So I would say try being more approachable towards a recruiters and a hiring managers time, and try understanding certain channels of how they could approach a company. Could be connecting through one of their uh, probably core acquaintances, or let's say someone they have interacted with and have built relationship in the past, or try
Hmm.
building a relationship with a recruiter, or do applying for the job profiles they have posted, right? And do provide time, or consider respecting time of hiring managers and recruiters is something that I would also suggest.
So many people, Prajwal, have this notion,
Right.
and I would love your take on this, is that if
Right.
we apply on a LinkedIn job post, we never hear back, right? Or if we apply even on company's job board, let's say on Lever or Greenhouse,
Right.
um, or through some company web page, we never
Right.
hear back. But if we apply through referral, the response rate is much higher. How true is this? And if it is true, then why? Like, can you shed some light on this?
Sure. Uh, of course, employer reference would certainly help for someone to gain some attention from hiring managers and recruiters, because employees whom we have hired, and if they are vouching for someone, that's
Yeah.
something which all of us do consider. And certainly employee referrals would see a lot of traction in the. Sorry,
Is that a candidate calling?
I'll just turn this off. Yeah. Sorry, Bhavin.
No
So
problem.
number one, employee reference, of course, because when a employee who works in the system vouchers for a candidate, that's where hiring managers and us would certainly provide our time in terms of evaluating and understanding if the candidate would fit in for the role. Secondly, you talked about candidates not hearing back when they do apply on the job post.
Yeah.
uh, It could be because a recruiter might have received 100 to 200 odd profiles, right? And end of the day, uh, recruiters do carry a matrix, right, with them. It could be in terms of understanding from the sourcing to the shortlisting stage, what's the metrics they follow, right? It could be in terms of, let's say, if they have received 300 odd profiles, our end objective is to just pass on 10 solid profiles to the hiring manager. And over
Hmm.
here, we'll put in, one of the most critical criteria in terms of, number one, evaluating a profile. Second, once we see through the profile and we find all these critical aspects matching in the profile, that's then when we call the candidates, we evaluate them, and we try understanding the overall problems they've solved and how critical their work experience would be in terms of building a product. We then talk more about the problems statement that the company is looking forward to solve. And if everything goes on well, then understanding the expectations in terms of compensation, right, and everything, we present the profile to the hiring manager. So in case someone feels that they might not be hearing from the recruiter when they do apply on, let's say, Liver or LinkedIn job post, it's purely because they might have uh, found the top candidates who have applied.
But if you're just
Correct.
applying and you don't know anyone in the company, and you don't hear back, then what you're saying is that your profile might not have the right keywords. It might not appear in the search based filtering, the initial first level filtering that a recruiter
Right.
does. And
Right.
because their goal is to find the top profiles, right? Their goal is to not cycle through each resume one after the other and just
Right.
sip tea while they do that, right? There are goals and there are metrics that you have to abide by. I think the bottom line metric is that you have to close a certain number of positions every
Yep.
month, every quarter, right?
Exactly.
So you can effectively like not afford to waste time on poorly written profiles, poorly written resumes, and then the initial search plays a big role. So if you don't hear back, you didn't even make it through that initial search, and that's like
Exactly.
on you, right?
Probably you might
That's
have
on
to
you
then
as a candidate.
probably then you might want to rework on the resume, right, and try making
Yeah,
it as quick as possible. Try adding those keywords that you might have missed in the earlier resume. I'm not saying the very common words, but let's say the ones which would help you in terms of getting a gate pass for the certain role, right? It could be the ones that you've worked on and you might have missed mentioning in the resume, right? So identify those gaps, try building your resume again, and then do try reapproaching the recruiters. I'm sure if the profile fits in well, you should be
right.
hearing a call.
Okay, awesome.
Right.
Let's move on. So let's say you have a good profile, and
Yeah.
we were dry running the loop for a new position, right?
Right.
So let's say you have a good profile as a candidate, you got shortlisted, the recruiter noticed you, and you had your interviews, right?
Correct.
And maybe you had your interviews with a couple of companies. How, as a candidate, should I select the best offer? As a recruiter, what would be your advice on
Correct.
selecting the best offer?
I mean, this is one of the most critical aspect which a recruiters and even a candidate come across, right? While uh, we are dealing with offer stages, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially from the candidate's end, if you have to evaluate an offer, it's very critical for you to ensure, again, in terms of prioritizing your needs. It could be compensation for certain end, could also be the overall exposure that you could gain from certain companies, could also be
Right.
the equity factor, right? The amount of equity that you could get from the company, and the trajectory the company is headed towards, could also be
Yeah.
in terms of working with some of the best team in the industry, could also be the manager that a candidate would report into. So all of these are factors, and these have to be stack ranked as per the priority. Let's say if compensation is a priority for someone, then for them, if they have an offer from early stage, let's say for an example, it's a Series A company to a Series E company, right? I'm sure the fixed compensation would certainly vary, across these two offers, wherein probably the number of equity that a candidate could get in Series A could be much more substantial than the equity they could
Right.
get in a Series C. I'm sure Series C company might be looking at an IPO or could be looking at buyback. So the encashment of the equity could be much more quicker over here. But rather, the potential, the overall wealth the potential to create wealth through equity would be much higher in Series A company. If let's say the company skyrockets, the product scales, and if say the candidate has certain X of product, certain X of equity with them. Let's say the product scales and the company goes to Series E level, right, in the next 3 to 4 years. The amount of equity that a candidate was holding, let's say if it was X, the same equity might have scaled to 25 to 30X, right, when the company grows, right,
Yeah.
and moves towards Series C and advanced stages. So this
Yeah,
is where
but that's a risk as well. Like
that's a risk.
that's an interplay between the risk and the immediate liquidity that you might be seeking,
Exactly.
because a Series A company can very well tank,
Correct.
right? And you wouldn't get like that X will become really 0.1x or even like 0.05x or even 0x,
Does.
right? It'll
It
just
does. Right. So
uh,
as I
so,
said,
so it's a yeah.
it's very critical for them to understand the company, the founders, and if they are very bullish about the company, right, if they know that the
Hmm.
founders and the company would scale in future, then it might be one of the best bets that they could take, right? Because I have seen personally some of my hires who have joined early stage of our portfolios, who have been offered certain amount of equity, and the company has now scaled multiple X, right? But as you
Right.
rightly mentioned, not every company will say the daylight, right? It's going to be certain set of companies, and one thing which is common is the, let's say, the hunger the founders have carried, and second, the industry overall, right? And if let's say
Yeah.
a company is building in an industry where the product would solve for the gray areas which none of the companies till date have covered, that's going to be a potential company that you might want to pick an offer with, right? And as I said, compensation could be a factor, or let's say if you want to work with some of the best minds in the industry,
Yeah.
probably at an early stage, and
Yeah, that's a growth factor
it's the
basically.
growth.
So compensation becomes one. So you have to balance your liquidity needs with risk appetite that you have, and that's on the comp side. And then you
Right.
can focus on your growth as to, yeah, I'll get
Yeah.
this fancy project, I'll get to work with this particular industry leader that I respect a lot,
Correct.
or it's a good team, good pedigree, right? So I'll
Right.
learn a lot, and you can sacrifice compensation a little bit for
Exactly.
that, to work with a good team. Yeah.
Correct. Correct. Again, if working or learning traits from a leader is your mandate, then of course picking up this could help you in terms of gaining your overall experiences for the lifetime. And probably you might look at a compensation difference of certain X, but the knowledge that you can gain can help you in terms of becoming a market leader in a shorter span. When you try understanding the trick and traits of how a founder, or let's say a leader that you wanted or you aspire to work with, and if you try understanding how they look at problem solving, how they look at building businesses, this could be a game changing experience for you in terms of being well known in the market, probably being the next entrepreneur and building a unicorn. So that's again the
Right.
priorities. And I've actually seen, Bhavin, that recently there has been a trend where people are looking forward to take a plunge in early stage and evaluate potential role with early stage companies which have been built by some of the best known leaders, the best minds in the industry, right? So
Yeah.
that they could gain more experience. It's like in a year they could probably gain an experience of 2 3 years, sort of, right? They could get to wear multiple hats, understand how critical products, how critical businesses have been built in the industry, which is nothing but move towards helping them progress in the overall ecosystem, right? So this is also something that they might want to evaluate. And finally, the risk factor, right? As you rightly mentioned, startups do carry
Yeah.
risk. Doesn't mean that late stage companies don't carry. We've also seen a lot of late stage companies, Google's and Amazon's also laying off, right?
Yeah.
So it's always very critical for the candidate to have a cushion, right, with him or her. Could be a cushion in terms of not being the lone breadwinner in the home, or having a surplus of money, so that in case things don't go in their way, they might have some cushion in terms of surviving. So depending on
Yeah.
all of these factors, it's very critical for them to stack rank and prioritize their needs, and then pick offers.
So being the lone breadwinner, right,
Sure.
might not be in everybody's hands, right? So you
Right.
might, like with respect to your own situation, you might be really a lone breadwinner, but then you
Right.
have to plan your finances separate, like differently. You can't follow an approach where there are multiple people earning in a family,
Yeah.
and you have to manage your risk separately in a different manner. You have to manage your growth expectations and your reserves in a very different manner.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's when I mentioned it's very critical for them to identify, even if, let's say, things don't go in their way with whatever
Yeah.
offer they pick. How does their cushion look like, right? In terms of at least relying on it, and in case of emergency sort of a situation. So that's very critical. And also, I would highly recommend any individual that I come across, especially my candidates, to have a risk appetite in terms of looking at longer term picture, right? Let's say a candidate might earn 5 lakh lesser now, right? Probably joining an early stage, but the experience they gain can help them in terms of earning many or you know let's say much more lakhs in the future, if I have to put
Yes.
it in, probably because
Yeah.
of the experience they gain, right? It shouldn't be the compensation is the only factor they should look at, but experience always plays a critical role in terms of enjoying the benefit, and then probably skyrocketing their journey right to the next level.
Sounds good. So they have to manage the risks, and the sooner you can get more freedom of choice, this like the better choices you can make in terms of your growth, which will
Correct.
fuel the future rise in your compensation, your total compensation. So it's a
Exactly.
long-term game that you have to play. But when you are mid to senior in your career, when
Right.
you're junior, you probably have like more dire financial needs. So yeah, you have to focus on money at that point to gain the freedom in the first place.
Correct.
um, so that's fine. So we talked about compensation, risk,
Yeah.
and growth. What apart from these three things, for example, location benefits, right?
Hmm.
People wanting to move abroad or willing to stay here in India,
Yeah.
work from office versus work from home situations, other
Hmm.
benefits,
Yeah.
right? All of this does not fall into either of the three categories: comp, risk, and growth. Where do you see these factors play a role in offer selection?
Of course, in fact, one among the most critical factor over here that I've seen for offer selection is the work location, right? Let's say if someone is preferring to work remotely, for them, let's say a certain person is staying in their hometown with their family. For them, asking them to relocate to a tier one city like Bangalore, Delhi, or Mumbai could be a constraint. Number one, for them in terms of finding an accommodation, the expenses that it would carry, right, for them in terms of completely relocating, right, and starting up is something that I've seen a lot of them do consider. Versus in case they get a remote
Yeah.
role, it's very easier for them in terms of operating, right? But again, working remotely to working in office have its own plus and minuses, right? In terms of, I'm sure you might have also observed that.
Yeah, yeah. I think we can do
In
a full podcast on that, just about the
exactly.
perils of working from home, and it's such a diverse topic post COVID.
Correct.
Yeah.
So as I said, that's one among the most critical aspect. Another thing could be, for a candidate, could be in terms of relocating internationally, right? Could also be
Hmm.
an opportunity for him or her from certain set of companies. And if that's in their aspiration, then they should certainly go ahead and consider that. But apart from that, there are also various benefits they do get. Probably could be on health insurance, or could be in terms of travel
Yeah. Yeah,
allowance and
but is
various.
that significant? Like, that's the question. While many companies might offer more or less
Yeah,
amounts of these, are they significant, or is it? I mean, you have some health benefit, sure. It
exactly. It's just
doesn't play a big role.
correct. It doesn't play a big role, and it's not significant. So hence I mentioned that in the last. But
Hmm.
ideally, for anyone to to be evaluating opportunities. So it should be the let's say the compensation, or could be the stage of company, could be the uh, uh, the overall exposure they could get working in an industry or working with a founder.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
also,
and it's an interplay. Like you can't maximize everything, right? So
correct,
you have to
correct.
focus on what's important to you, optimize for that, and then sacrifice the others.
Exactly. So as I said, prioritization end of the day, right? Let's say if
Hmm.
someone is looking for their future employer, they would just need to prioritize. Let's say if they want to be an entrepreneur and they want to understand trick and traps of startups, then do join early stage. Learn from the founders on how they are building products, so that end of the day, you could build rapport with VCs, you could build rapport with founders, you could understand the ecosystem. And I've also seen another case where candidates would love to explore different domains, right? Let's say if someone is working in B2C and they want to understand how B2B works, right? Or let's say in B2C, if someone is working in hyperlocal, they would love to understand how fintech as an industry work, how travel tech as an industry work. So I've also seen people do switching because of their interest to gain experiences working in multiple industries. So this is also one of a case where candidate would explore and might want to keep handy in terms of identifying their potential new employer.
Got it. Okay,
Right.
sounds good. So that's a very comprehensive conversation on offer selection. Let's move on
Right.
to a more touchy subject, which has been
Right.
very relevant recently:
Hmm.
layoffs. Right.
Right.
Um, a couple of questions here. Right. If I'm impacted as a
Right.
candidate and I'm laid off, am I like, is that even seen in negative light? How would,
Hmm.
as a recruiter, you would see somebody who is laid off? How would they appear in your searches? How would you filter them out? Like, would you penalize them because of the fact that they have been laid off? Like, how does that play from a recruiter's point?
Look, so there is always a notion in the industry. I'm not saying from the recruiters end, but from the industry end, that it's generally the top layer which will be always safe, and probably the bottom layer or something which let's say, let me put it in this way, that basis performance layoffs do happen in in a company,
Yeah,
uh, which I don't consider to be always the case, because in most of the case it could be the business, let's say probably in terms of saving cost, in terms of helping business to scale, or to reduce the burn, the company would lay
yeah,
off one particular segment of product itself, right? And I've seen through this in my earlier employment as well, and now that I work with a lot of startups, I hear through a lot of them. So that's when candidates, or let's say recruiters, do consider this fact that it's very critical for the candidate, right? And also, another thing is, always layoffs is a setback for anyone, right? It impacts a person's mindset
oh
to
man,
a certain extent, that
yeah,
they stop uh, understanding what's happening with them, right? It's too impactful on their mind. I've seen some of them also go through therapy to find a solution on how they could ensure to get back to sanity, right? And that's something which I've seen, and
yes,
it's one of the most painful process, right? Especially for the employer and also for the candidate, in terms of separating. Often I've seen recruiters do consider candidates experiences, right? Before we get into a nuance that the candidate might have been fired due to performance issues or something, right? Another thing is, we often do get good recommendations from founders, or let's say their peers or their managers who are letting them leave, right? Talking about the impact that the candidate have played in terms of growing the ecosystem, or growing the overall product for them, and also their previous experiences would speak in most of the cases. Let's say if someone had
hmm.
built from a certain X to multiple X earlier before joining the company, and in case they have been laid off in this company, that talks about the potential the candidate carries, right? Doesn't mean that it's always the bottom half. It could also be unfortunate instances where someone gets into layoffs. But I would highly recommend a candidate to carry on with their confidence, not to lose confidence, right? Because confidence is the key over here, especially someone is going through such a
Yeah.
setback. To keep pushing them, to keep encouraging them, right? In terms of being in the positive mindset is very critical. And end of the day, they should be able to find something interesting for them.
Yeah, it's
So this
important to not bomb interviews. For example,
exactly
because you've been laid off and you're in the wrong frame of mind, that might
right,
cloud your own representation of what you've achieved, what value you have brought on the table. And
right,
like that's the worst thing you can do when you're laid off. So
right,
yeah, I agree with you. Like retain your calm, which allows you to represent what you have done also in a better manner. Because like the first most important call is a screening call with a recruiter,
ex-
and if you sound all gloomy and not so sure, it
right,
it's a waste of time, as you said, for a recruiter, because they are also slammed on the other side, and
correct,
it prevents the right set of information to come back on the table,
exactly.
because now you're focusing more on grieving rather than conveying what you have achieved.
Right,
So grieving is like fine, but it doesn't help the recruiter to be your advocate.
exactly,
So that's not very useful. Yeah.
correct. And that's when I think, again, keeping your calm, having your confidence, and being very honest and truthful while you're interacting with either a recruiter or a hiring manager on what are the reasons for setback, right? And how have a candidate worked, or how productive have they been in their earlier functions, talking more about the impact they've driven in their earlier organizations, earlier employments, is something which is very
Yeah.
critical. Because not every cases that we see is that the switches that we do would be fruitful, right? At times, because of the industry, because of the funding, because of the business factors, a company would look at layoffs. But that's something that we see. By the way, when a large scale company lays off, let's say if it's a company with over 5,000 to 10,000 plus employees, that's when
Hmm.
uh, a company do try evaluating if it has been through performance basis, or if it has been through by probably slashing down a product line itself, and what has been the reason why certain candidate hasn't been or they haven't been able to find something internally or absorb into some internal rules, with such a large company, right? So that's where the candidate have
Yeah.
to be more vocal in terms of expressing why couldn't their tenure work out in certain company, and what are they aspiring, and how could they help in terms of growing the next employer in certain domain they are in.
Yeah, I think this is a very important point, because in smaller
Yeah,
companies, let's say it's a less than 100 is very small, maybe less than 500 or
yeah,
even less than 1,000 people. When layoffs happen,
correct.
the talent acquisition community, they sort of know from
Yeah,
grapevine, and because they are hearing from multiple candidates, they know
correct.
what has happened,
Yeah,
and whether the layoffs were performance based, or they were because a department was shut down, or a business line was shut down and many
yeah,
competent people were let go. So there probably the talent acquisition community already has the context. But in a large company, there is so much happening and the internal structure is not very clear, it might not be as apparent. So it becomes even more important if you are coming out from a larger company,
yes,
to make your case clearly and to lay
correct.
out facts, which will help your own case. Yeah.
Correct. So that's when being transparent, having the right information on why the product was, probably shut down or rolled off, right, from the overall product lines that the company runs, especially for larger companies, and also ensuring that you have the right um, understanding on what the business priorities are all about. How did the company come to a conclusion of shutting down a product, right? You can be a software engineer, you can be a senior software engineer, or could also be a product manager, but try having more understanding on the reason why the company decided to probably shut down certain vertical is very critical. That and then trying to build your case more around the impact that you've anyways driven over here in the business, right? How have you tried, developing or scaling the products, and even earlier, right? How has your impact been in your earlier employments, and what are the products? What are the critical features that you've developed? Is something that should talk about. And in case you could carry
Got
a
it.
reference with you, that's super helpful. Could be
Hmm.
the manager that you've reported to in your current company, or probably from the earlier employment. They could talk very high about you. Then that's an interesting subject for us to lead.
Got it. Sounds good. This was a very interesting conversation, Prajwal,
Right.
and I think we touched upon various aspects. So hopefully, this conversation gives candidates more idea about what goes on in a recruiter's mind and
Yeah.
how can they optimize the whole process for better for everybody, not just for themselves but also for the recruiters.
Correct. Correct.
Thank you very
And
much for taking out the time today. Yeah, do you have any closing notes?
I have, in fact, given we are also talking about social media, right, in this era of how networking plays a very critical role, right? I would
Mm-hmm.
highly suggest, whoever has been watching this podcast to involve yourself in networking, right? Probably connect with a lot of like-minded groups, interact with a lot of recruiters. Do try attending a lot of events which comes in your way, right? Because networking is where you try understanding the trends in the ecosystem. You try understanding what's happening in let's say startups or across industry, and try building more meaningful connects. Could be with recruiters, could be with industry leaders, could be with founders, right? So that this could also help you in terms of bridging your gap, in terms of analyzing and finding what you need in your professional life, right? Some of them do have
Yeah.
a blank, right, on what are they looking forward to achieve, right, and how could they follow through a process in terms of achieving their dream. So networking is very critical, and so on a closing note, I would say networking is very critical. I would highly recommend everyone to be active on social media and keep interacting.
Awesome. And it's important to interact in a meaningful manner. Like it's not about
Yes.
posting fluff on LinkedIn and
Like,
getting an illusion that yeah, I am active on social media. Rather being active in the true sense of the term, where you're genuinely connecting with people, right? And the
exactly.
quality probably trumps the quantity here, where
Correct.
it doesn't matter if your post is reaching 1,000 people, but rather if you can have like 5 or 10 meaningful conversations in a quarter, that's going to go a long, long way. Um, over having just like random presence on social media. So yeah.
Also be I would say it should also be give and take, wherein you take a lot of interesting insights from the networking events that you have, and also do
Right.
contribute. That if a founder is building, and in case your experience would help a founder in terms of building, try doing a pro bono and try helping the founder, right? Or in case you have good referrals with you, try referring, right? At the end of the day,
Right.
this is how you do, and this is how you build your network.
Awesome. Networking is important. Please network.
Networking is, yes.
Okay, sounds good. With that closing line, thank you very much, Prajwal, for taking out the time to chat with us on Pakka Nimbu Podcast. And I had a blast having this conversation with you.
Thanks a lot, Bhavin, and thanks for hosting me here and sharing my thoughts. It's been a pleasure interacting with you, as always. Let's stay in
Awesome.
touch.